believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Brandes, also known as Ricky Brandes, and I have a great conversation for you today. Great guest, great conversation. Today we have Jeffrey A. Tucker from the Brownstone Institute. He's also one of the people that are responsible for the Great Barrington Declaration, which I'm sure many of you guys have heard referenced before. It was so important that I believe after some Fauci emails were released, it was uncovered that Fauci was actually attempting to silence the Great Barrington Declaration. So very interesting. And on this show, we reflect on what happened the last couple of years and Jeffrey's perspective on it all and some of the research he's done on everything that happened. I'll try to keep this intro short. As you guys know, this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of my podcast, consider giving some value back. And there's plenty of ways of doing that. We have a Patreon page if you want to support us monthly. And everyone who does, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, because it's awesome to know that I can depend on that every month. We have a PayPal account if you want to send donations. And thank you also for everyone who's done that. We have a crypto wallet if you want to send Bitcoin. But eventually I will also be sharing my Ethereum wallet. So if you guys want to send that, we have a merch store and tons of new stuff going up weekly. So please check out the rippleeffectpodcast.com, click on support and find links to all the things I'm referencing. We also have a Rockfin channel. If you listen to us or watch us on Rockfin, that supports the show, and it's a video platform. So it's like a YouTube alternative, but without all the censorship, and a lot of the content creators that you know and love are on there. So please check that out. I also have music. And then last but not least, I have a partnership with the University of Reason. The autonomy course is the course that is very popular. Matt from Content Safe and many of the people who are involved with the Grand Theft World podcast, which is Richard Grove's amazing podcast, have taken this course and benefited from this course. And basically the easiest way to explain it or describe it to you is it's a university for people who are looking to get more out of life, people who have skills but don't know how to expand on those skills and make a career out of it. It's a way of meeting like-minded people and connecting with the community. It's a way of finding your niche. It's a way of getting some value out of your life, doing something more fulfilling, helping you understand yourself in the world around you. And it's been life-changing for everyone who's taken the course. And if I did a crappy job explaining it all to you, please check out episode 392, which was a recent episode I did with Richard Grove, who started the University of Reason and a dear friend of mine. And we go much deeper into the origin of the University of Reason, what he's trying to accomplish, how it can help people, and much more. So please check out episode 392 with Richard Grove, the founder and creator of the University of Reason, and you can learn much more. And also, like I said, go to the rippleeffectpodcast.com, click on support, and find all the ways you can support the show. And please also check out the merchandise store. You can go directly to the merchandise store by going to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com, or, like I said, go to the rippleeffectpodcast.com, click on support, and find all the links there. And when you do go to the merchandise store, give me some feedback on the logos, which designs you like, what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of, and any feedback is very much appreciated. And speaking of feedback, if you can't support the show financially, of course, review, share, tell people about the show. Subscribe to the show on all the platforms, video platforms and audio platforms. You can find the show. We're on Band.video. We're on Rumble, BitChute, Rockfin, Minds. We'll be on Iconic soon, and many more platforms. So keep a lookout for that. And you'll find links to all those channels and all the places you can find a Ripple Effect podcast on my website, rippleeffectpodcast.com. Thank you guys. Enjoy the conversation. I'll talk to you in the next one. Peace. And get into all that and much more. So, you can start back as far back as you'd like. I love hearing people's personal stories because I think it's there's always little interesting parts to the journey that leads them to where they are and who they are today.
Well, in 1830, the teenage son of a Massachusetts Congregationalist minister decided he would seek a new life in Texas. So he immigrated from Massachusetts to Texas. My family's been there ever since. I was raised in West Texas, and brought up to be a musician until that became boring. So that I went into studying economics, fell in love with the topic, and I've been doing that my entire career. And as a writer and editor, administrator, building web spaces when that became possible, and worked for Mises.org and Fee.org and AIR.org, and the shutdowns of 2020 were a shock to me because it completely reversed all my optimism and happiness that I had in the world. I was this kind of naive liberal libertarian guy celebrating the glories of technology and the inevitability of peace and progress forever, and the rise of human intelligence. I mean, I wrote whole books on this topic, and it's embarrassing now looking back at it because I felt like some sort of Whiggish Victorian era liberal proclaiming the possibility of universal forever emancipation of humanity, and that's what I thought. That's what I thought we were going. So 2020 was actually the Trump administration was a rude awakening for me in many ways because it represents such a fundamental paradigm, a challenge to the prevailing orthodoxies, with the rise of nationalism, and then the protectionist impulses of the administration troubled me greatly, reversing 70 years of progress for lower tariffs and freer trade and that sort of thing. That had been a major priority since World War II, since 1948, since the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. So it was like I knew that there's this. I didn't like it. I didn't approve of it, but I also figured it was going to be enormously disruptive. And of course, then came the decoupling agenda with China, and then just right on the heels of that, we saw the pandemic panic, that began in really January of 2020, and I saw it coming because I had been writing about pandemics for a long time. And in 2015, we saw, with the Ebola scare, what government was capable of doing. Not just quarantining sick people, which is kind of what you want to do when, in the case of Ebola. But they had quarantined everybody who was returning from Africa, and it involved tens of thousands of people in quarantine. So it's illegal quarantines. They got challenged in the courts, and just crazy times where state authorities, public health authorities, were just sticking people in bubbles for weeks at a time, with no right to contact the outside world or leave, and having to have food delivered through slots. It was just crazy. And they weren't sick. It was crazy because you can't pass on Ebola unless you're actually symptomatic. It's just not possible to have asymptomatic spread of Ebola. It's just not. We know that. So that was a kind of a strange thing I need to look into a little bit more, but it's a little bit of a warm-up exercise for what happened in 2020. But the powers have been there at least since 2006, even earlier, really. During wartime, Second World War, we got the very first federal quarantine powers passed in a bill that hardly anybody paid any attention to. I think it's called the Public Health Something Act, like that, and it gave federal government quarantine powers. So that was already in the 1940s. But it's just gotten worse. And under the Bush administration in 2006, suddenly, they're talking about lockdowns in the event of a pandemic spread, and then how we're going to have to, have social distancing and closures and capacity restrictions and travel restrictions and school, just everything. It never came to pass. 2006, the avian bird flu never became a big thing. H1N1, 2009 under Obama. he couldn't be bothered to pay much attention to it at all because the financial crisis was going on. So anyway, it's just these powers were just waiting for the perfect moment, for the perfect storm to come along, and that's what hit us in March of 2020, and shattering my perspective on the world. I knew things would never be the same, and that we faced fundamentally different challenges. So a year later, I founded the Brownstone Institute to respond to and focus on this really a crisis, not just for public health, but for our economic lives, our culture, and our basic assumptions about the relationship between individuals, communities, and the state. I mean, that's really what's at stake here, and we need to get smart and intelligent about it and do good research. And I felt like we needed a space to talk about these things honestly and truthfully.
Yeah, and you guys were early because you were part of the Great Barrington documents, right? And the doctors that all basically were speaking up against the lockdowns and how it would be basically counterproductive. And we see now how we can look back and I think people are a little bit more emotionally detached from the situation, because at the time all the fear mongering of the media and the numbers and all this stuff, it was, and then the censorship, right? I mean, as somebody who has a little bit of history in tech, like the censorship was really concerning, because the idea that the first time in history you couldn't get a second opinion on a medical issue, on a disease, a virus, whatever, and somebody with a PhD who just contradicts whatever one guy with a PhD says is automatically considered pseudoscience. That was concerning. I mean, never before could I not go to a doctor, get a second opinion or a third opinion or fourth opinion. People look at information and they might process it differently, might see something differently. So to me, that was like one of the first things that was really concerning. And then I'm sure you ran into like Event 201 and really just like, okay, you are acting like you guys weren't prepared for this, but yet you had all these scenarios, the SPARS document and all this stuff, just kind of like showing that you guys were more than prepared. You knew that there would be some people being skeptical of the vaccine. You knew there would be some uproar in regard to lockdowns. So what was it for you that seemed to be the first, I guess, that planted the seed of doubt on what was going on? Or because of your knowledge of the history of this all, did you never fall for it?
Well, I never fell for it because, even in 2020, 15 years prior, 16 years prior, I had written articles, predicting exactly what happened. I mean, that if government ever attempted to use its powers to control a widespread virus like this, that it would end in calamity. And I knew this. So, and of course, one of the things you don't know going into a pandemic is exactly the nature of the pathogen. How it spreads, how far it spreads, what's the severity, what's the prevalence, and what's the latency, which is to say, how long does it live in the body before you start being symptomatic. These are all things you sort of want to know, and I didn't know any of that. But I began to look into it in late January, and all the data coming out of Wuhan was actually very, very precise and accurate. There's very good scientists, and they were putting out extremely good data about the demographics of who was affected, the latency periods, the possibility of symptomatic spread, the possible infection fatality rate. All this data was pouring in, and it was clear by late January that this would be a very severe virus for the old and infirm, but that almost everybody else in the population would very easily handle it and move on. So it all depends on the demographics of the country. But once you can adjust for age here, and it turns out that the severity of the virus is stable all over the world. So it was very clear what we needed to be doing throughout the month of February, which was focusing on how to get people who are sick well, on the therapeutics. And oddly and strangely, the whole month of February just blasted by us, and with almost no talk of that. So it was very concerning for a month. There was just this period of silence. We know now because of emails and that sort of thing, what was actually going on were the top, sort of pandemic planners, Collins at NIH, Farrar at the Wellcome Trust in London, along with the Imperial College, and Fauci, of course, through NIH in the US, were all very, very consumed by the possibility that this was a lab leak from Wuhan, from their good friends at the Wuhan Virus Institute, or whatever it's called. And they were very worried that it was a lab leak, and they were pretty sure it was a lab leak. What they didn't know is whether it was deliberate or accidental. So they spent most of February laying out a kind of the spin, a response in a way that would protect them, because there's various ways in which the U.S. had been funding gain-of-function research through third parties and that sort of thing for this entire period. So they were concerned that they were going to all be blamed. And I'm telling you, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is what Farrar writes in his book. He's very clear about this. So by the time March rolls around, basically everybody was in a panic, and there was a presumption that the most important thing was to keep the virus out, to keep cases at a very bare minimum, which in retrospect is a crazy view. It's just not possible. I mean, we know now from seroprevalence data and wastewater tests and blood samples from 2019, the virus had been here already 6 months before people even worried about it. But there was a complete loss of, I would say, like intelligence or rationality during the whole period. New York Times on February 27th did a podcast interview with their lead virus reporter named Donald J. McNeil, in which he just did his best in the whole series of that podcast to whip everybody up into a frenzy. He was talking about 3 and 4% rates of death, which is a weird way of saying things, because the way the human ear hears that is that 3 to 4% of the population itself is going to die. He never distinguished CFR, case fatality rates, infection fatality rates, deaths per million, excess deaths. He never made any of these kind of distinctions. He just called it a death rate, and was throwing out figures of 3 and 4%. And then the next day, the New York Times ran his major article saying, for this virus, which is so deadly for everyone, we better just go medieval on it. Go medieval, lock down the cities, stop travel, close the highways, shut all businesses, schools, everything. So that was New York Times saying this March 28th. And I knew at that moment, because the New York Times is weirdly influential. And I just knew that there was something up. That was a bad day for me, because I just thought, there's no way the New York Times is reversing a century of pandemic coverage, favoring panic over calm, unless there's something brewing here. And then sure enough, March 8th was the first big shutdown in the US, and it was the conference South by Southwest was unilaterally canceled by the mayor of the city, Austin, Texas, a week out, and there are several 100,000 people planning to be there. He just on his own canceled the whole thing. It was, and I wrote an article saying this is outrageous. This is an attack on commerce, an attack on human rights, and on civilization. Well, people did not like or share that article, and I was pretty much alone. And so by that time, the public had just gone completely bonkers. And then I think, I don't know anything about sports, but I guess March Madness was canceled by the NBA, it was just purely out of fear. And then March 12th came, Trump's announcement that he gave a televised address in which he said, you can't fly from Europe. All Americans need to come back, and Europeans can't come to the US starting on Monday. And he also made a misstatement in that, that's correct, March 12th. And in that same lecture, he said, the teleprompter said, this will not apply to goods, right? The stoppages of all travel would not, of course, apply to goods. He changed it, improvised it, said it would apply to goods. Okay, so there's all kinds of screw ups in that talk. He was not himself. It looked like a hostage video. Then they brought him in over the weekend. Fauci, Birx, and Kushner brought Trump in over Saturday and Sunday and spent endless hours with him trying to persuade him of the need to lock down the entire economy, which he did. Finally, on Monday morning, he went to did a press conference with these guys, and they announced the lockdowns, the closures, and then the rest was history. It was a shocking times. Now, you asked, was there ever a moment where I wondered? There was. I mean, there was on March 12th. I took a friend to the airport, and I was a little concerned about shaking his hand goodbye at the end. I'm not sure. There's just I'm talking about like 20 seconds there, not even, like maybe 12 seconds, in which I suddenly began to wonder if I was wrong. That this really, like, how can you have a world that's gone completely insane? The airport by this time was already emptied out, and New York had gone insane. But I wondered, how could all this be happening if this really is a common textbook respiratory virus?
I had the
So-
same issue where I think initially right in the beginning, because I was having people over my house when everybody was told to stay at home, and I have two little ones, a son and a daughter, and I'm like, listen, people, come over, give them some social interaction, bring over your germs. I'm like, it's healthy for them. I mean, that's how we've survived all these years. I'm like, that's the natural way of living. And then I remember before I made that decision, I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, what if I'm wrong? What if there's a slight chance I'm this isn't what I think it is. And I saw it with libertarians. So I had Scott Horton on. It was actually a podcast that I had a lot of positive feedback, because Scott Horton, who is a well-known kind of libertarian, writes for antiwar.com. He's written books on very, on geopolitics and stuff like that, very well known in the geopolitical world. And yet, as a libertarian, he seemed to be kind of not upset about the lockdowns. And when I had him on, we had because I was being accused a little bit from because as you know, people were very emotional during this time, and I think that obviously played into the plan, because you get people afraid, you get people emotional, you can't even have a logical discussion about the facts. And I had Scott Horton on, and we kind of disagreed. We did like almost an hour and a half, whatever it was, a podcast, disagreeing on if we should stay at home for 2 weeks, if we should have lockdowns, if we should wear masks, all this stuff. And I can't remember if he had a loved one that was high risk. I think it might have been his wife, or maybe somebody related who I think made him a little bit more concerned. But I was kind of surprised that libertarians didn't jump on this immediately and say, regardless if this is dangerous or not, it's not dangerous enough to justify these actions, and two, based on the principle of being anti-government overreach, like, you can obviously see how this is going to turn really bad, because eventually it's like you stay home for 2 weeks, then it's 3 weeks, then it's 2 years, and it's like, all this authority that you're giving these politicians and governments, they're never going to give it back, or at least they're not going to give it all back. And it's like, it was concerning to see some people that I thought would see right through this. They seemed, it's, I don't know if it was the fear, like you discussed, like the 20 seconds of doubt that like seeped in for a little bit. Like I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, because it's like, okay, maybe the media just did their job really well, and that's not to give you the news, but to scare the crap out of everybody. And maybe it just worked really well. And I'm also concerned, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Like, I'm also concerned about how, I feel like as humans, like a lot of times we deal with trauma by trying to get past it, right? We don't think about it. You hide it somewhere in your subconscious and you move on from it. It's not the best way of dealing with it, but I think it's usually the first way we try to deal with it. And I feel like now with the Ukraine thing in the news and all these possibilities of war and more attention on geopolitics instead of what happened in 2020, I feel like people were traumatized because they were home, they were afraid, everything that they enjoyed doing in life was taken away from them, and now it's like people are ready to move on from it, like it's trauma, and they're like, let's put it behind us and move on, when I really think we should continue to focus on it to make sure who was responsible for it finally gets in some trouble. Somebody gets in some trouble. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, there need to be investigations, but your point about it, people's desire to move on, is typical in a trauma. People did this after war. I mean, it's happened after World War I and World War II that you couldn't get veterans to talk about it. You couldn't. It was just too upsetting and too awful. So you just didn't have. After World War II, there was another great reset. And it was like, okay, that's done. Let's forget it. I mean, it's true. It ate up 6 years of our lives and destroyed our families, and everybody's been murdered. And the American life, we've been suffering of rationing, deprivation, whatever. But let's just forget about it and think about the future. And I think that's what people are doing right now. But the problem is, I understand that, but the problem is we're still dealing with the after effects of this thing, and they're getting worse. The inflation has a direct relationship to lockdowns. The war in Ukraine, is related to the lockdowns and the nationalism that was promoted during that period. We even had vaccine nationalism. Every nation had different vaccines that they approved, and the shutdown of travel massively crushed the normal affections that people had for other countries, and that perception that we're all sort of people of the world, that was shattered in lockdowns. And so then people just started behaving really badly. I mean, like the old moral postulates seem to be gone. All the assumptions, the stability, the stable liturgy of life was just completely shattered. So it's not, the fact that we're now in a wartime situation with Ukraine and Russia. We're dealing with hyperinflation here at home. I saw my first gas lines, yesterday. We have lost complete trust in public health and public authority in general. And the Biden administration is massively unpopular, and the polls are incredible. Consumer sentiment right now is lower than it's been in 40 years, but it's about to be lower than it's ever been on record when they started measuring this stuff back in 1976. So we're dealing with an immense crisis right now. And none of these crises are discrete. They're all related to lockdown policies. So we have to talk about it. Fortunately, we do have some people in Congress that are determined to get to the bottom of this whole thing. Ron Johnson of Wisconsin and Rand Paul are the two top people, and also that's in the Senate. And then the House has people like Thomas Massie. So there are Republicans out there that are concerned about it, but there's also a lot of people that are just very, very anxious to cover it up, forget about it, and move on, because it implicates both parties. We can't forget the lockdowns began under Trump, and many Republicans went along with it, many. And you mentioned Scott Horton, but I mean, I'm sorry, but there are major libertarian institutions and voices out there that were all leaning in for lockdowns. Everybody was for them. Just absolutely pathetic, really, and sad, and such an indication of the level of ignorance out there on the left and on the right and among libertarians. Everybody, it's just amazing. There was just a period of a complete loss of rationality, distrust in the science, distrust in the data, and just mass freak out promoted by a ruling class. It was truly grim. And the other thing that was very strange about this is, once you start dividing society according to who's sick and who's not, or who's clean and who's not, it's funny how people are very anxious to enter into the clean category and get out of the dirty category. So you had the Zoom classes who are, on Twitter, and they have their websites, and they're, able to stay home in their pajamas and do their work. We're all for lockdowns because they wanted to stay safe and clean, get away out of the way of the pathogen. And they did. For a long time, it actually worked until it stopped working. And it stopped working about a year and a half later, when the Zoom class all got COVID, in starting in October through January, this most recent year, to 2021, 2022. Everybody's going to get COVID. That's just the way it works. The Zoom class finally got it. So I got immunities, robust, lasting immunities. And that's the way the pandemic ends, with everybody getting it. All the rest is all nonsense. And I had thought that we had understood this back in 2020 in April. I mean, we had gone through 2 weeks flattening curve, all this crap. And finally, people started talking about, the way pandemics end is through herd immunity. Okay, we've known that for 100 years, if not 2,500 years, So that was trying to get out there in the media that we had to upgrade our immune systems to account for this new pathogen. So I started getting optimistic in early April, maybe it's mid-April, and I started tweeting, kind of funny tweets, condemning masks as a sign of subjugation, and then at one point saying, "Hey, I'm headed out because I was noticing that nobody was going to the store. It was all just this public hysteria, and I was really anxious to calm everybody. Yeah, just very anxious to defy, these norms." So I tweeted out something like, "Well, I'm headed out now to contribute to the spread of herd immunity." Okay. Well, this was not a good time for jokes. I tell you, the ceiling fell in on me after I said that, because people thought I was going out there to spread disease. I mean, that's not quite what I said. I just said that we're going to get to herd immunity, and the way you get to herd immunity is by living a normal life. That's what I really meant to say. But people took it the wrong way, and it was just no time for jokes. It's like the Taliban had taken over the US. So I was kind of hung out to dry in many ways during that period. So yeah, I've been a dissident on this whole thing for a very long time.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talk about how people have lost trust for public health since 2020. I don't know if we've lost trust, or maybe some of what was always going on has been exposed. I think a lot of people from the outside looking in just assumed like science was black and white. It was cut and dry. It was very easy to understand what was pseudoscience and what wasn't. And I think it exposed that a lot of our science is pushed by other agendas, and there's a lot of other stuff going on behind the scenes, and that scientists aren't these, and doctors, even for that, aren't these, these people who have no egos or have no other outside influences, that all they care about is their work and all, and money and ego and fame. None of that matters, So it's a lot of people were surprised when they found out that Dr. Fauci was the highest paid government employee. A lot of people didn't even know who he was, even though this guy has been one of the most influential people in the medical world for a long time now. I mean, I'll go all the way back to the AIDS epidemic. He did a lot of the same scare tactics. He did an interview, I don't know if it was on 60 Minutes or what show he was on, where he talked about you could possibly get it by being near somebody. You can get it from the air, this and that, even though there was no evidence to prove that that was even true, but it scared the crap out of people, and so you see a lot of the same tactics being used again. And some of the people that have been very influential in a bad way, finally being exposed a little bit. And same thing with Bill Gates. Bill Gates spent tons of money on PR and making himself look good. Obviously, during the back in the 90s and 80s, he wasn't very popular. And then all of a sudden he became this guy, this unhealthy looking guy who cares about public health. And yet, and also his philosophy always seemed to contradict themselves, because in one hand, he had this idea of wanting to vaccinate the world to save lives. And then in another interview, or sometimes even in the same interview later in the conversation, he would be talking about how we need to lower the population. And I'm just like, are people not connecting the dots? And I know you brought up the Wellcome Trust. I believe Henry Wellcome, the guy who started it, was also linked to eugenics. I've read that somewhere. I know that there's some links also with Bill Gates and his family.
Yeah,
that's a part of it.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I don't know that much about the Wellcome Trust. I know that it's loaded with money, and it's basically the Gates Foundation of the UK. And I know Farrar, because I read his book, and I know that they were all for the lockdowns. The idea that Wellcome Trust was interested in eugenics, wouldn't surprise me in the slightest bit, because, back in the 19 teens, nearly every member of the ruling class anywhere in the world was for eugenics. I mean, that was orthodox. It was very unusual to find people who are against eugenics. And, basically people had come to the conclusion that that human procreation needed to be designed and structured by scientists. And then if we just let people randomly procreate, fall in love with this, just mix it up, that we're going to degrade the human biology to such an extent that we're going to be dysgenic, And so eugenics is just sort of standard science in those days. And that continued all the way up through the 1940s. It was only after World War II when, there's a perception the Nazis took it too far, And so eugenics became unfashionable at that point. But they still believe in population control. I mean, that's just normal. That's typical ruling class attitudes. They don't like freedom. I mean, they just don't like freedom. They don't like the chaos of freedom. They like people having lots of kids, or traveling around, making wild decisions. They want to plan and they want to rule. That's just always the way the ruling class is. That's why they're not fans of freedom. So for them, I mean, the lockdowns were just like a dream. I think back at it, it's almost that, the digital world just opened up things in new ways and gave people new platforms, the ability to speak, the ability to be on TV. You could make your own television channel, basically, with YouTube. You could reach billions of people with podcasting. Anybody could start a website, speak. And, this went on. It began basically in the early 90s and really intensified with the invention of the web browser in 95. And after the turn of the millennium, it just got more and more wild, and to the point that, there's a presumption out there that, we're all going to be emancipated, through this information revolution. The new billionaires are being minted all the time out of the new technology, and it was an exciting time to be alive. The old legacy money was dying and fading. The analog world was kind of sinking away. The digital world was rising, and I just think there's this. I don't think there's an element of the ruling classes like this chaos has got to stop. We just can't. We can't go down this road. We need to figure out which companies in the digital space we like. And the ones we like are the compliant ones. Let's put them to the test. And everybody else needs to learn to shut up, realize that these third-party platforms can be taken away from you. And we're gonna reorder the world. We're gonna stop all this crazy freedom stuff. Now, there was also, so that's, I think, the big picture, but there was also the undeniable element of the desire to get Trump. There's really, even now, an impression that his presidency was illegitimate. He was never approved to be president, that he won on a fluke. He wasn't supposed to be the president. And people are just determined to drive him out. I mean, the Trump, anti-Trump hysteria, I've never seen anything like it. I've never been a fan, but my God, he was the president. But the Washington Post, the New York Times, the story, outrageous. So lockdowns were kind of an amazing way to troll the Trump administration into doing the dumbest thing imaginable, which is to destroy the economy in advance of the election. That's, I think it was one of the motivations, no question.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it definitely, everything became political, which I think end up helping make this issue so hard for people to see through, and for people to look at the information and be open-minded about what was really going on, because they were playing, team politics, right? They were just defending their team. It's like, okay, Trump wanted to open up the economy. The people who hated Trump thought that he was being selfish, and it was about him being reelected, and it was about money and profit and capitalism. So and there's things more important than that. And so because he's not sensitive, let's all turn on him and want the lockdowns and want people to wear masks and save lives. And if we only save one life, then it's worth it, and all that type of stuff. And so it was really hard to get people to talk about what was going on without it being political, without people immediately assuming, oh, you're against masks because you're a Trump supporter. It's like, no, I'm against masks because it makes no scientific sense to why a healthy person should have to wear a mask to stop the spread of a virus they don't have.
Right. Yeah, and especially crazy because Trump kept changing his mind. I mean, in January he was saying, look, this is a flu. Believe me, it's just going to wash through and it'll just go away. Everybody just calm down. Flu kills a lot of people every year. Just think, well, what is all this hysteria? Well, then he himself got kind of whipped up into a frenzy by Fauci and Birx, and the critical way they got to him was by saying this virus is an import from China, and we know, Mr. President, you don't like imports from China. Well, this is the worst import from China ever. When in dealing with China's imbalance of trade, you use protectionism. We're going to keep it out. So similarly with this pathogen, you need to keep it out. And the test of your success will be to keep cases as low as possible, hopefully zero. All right, that burned into his brain. So now suddenly he had a geopolitical challenge, which is keep the pathogen out. So they trolled him. And not to mention the fact he's a germaphobe, right? Anyway, so he became like the first practitioner of zero COVID. I mean, even before Australia and New Zealand. I mean, it was Trump. And there were 7 cases, and he's, how did these 7 cases get in here? And so, I mean, it's just crazy. So that's how they talked him into lockdown. Now, later, once the lockdowns kept going on and the economy was reeling and Congress was spending trillions of dollars and people were so upset, and small towns were being gutted, businesses being closed. He was like, what is all this wreckage? What's going on around now? We're talking about, say, I think maybe this started in May or June, but by July, he was kind of done with this, especially because the Black Lives Matter protests were going on. And suddenly lockdowns were over temporarily. And the same people that were for lockdowns were saying, well, the coronavirus is bad public health threat, but racism is even worse. So get out there and protest. Get out there and protest. So Trump thought, I don't know, this is all looking a little bit political. So then he got some new advisors in by August and eventually changed his mind completely, realized that immunity matters, that the pathogen is going to spread, that's going to sweep through, and we're going to get through it. So he flipped, like 3 different times on this. So it became very difficult for, and during, the fall and of 2020, when Trump was pushing for vaccines, everybody on the center left were saying, I wouldn't take this vaccine, under any conditions. This is a Trump vaccine. I wouldn't trust it. It's bad science. You can't make a vaccine that fast. You can't give it to me. Those exact same people a year later were screaming for vaccine mandates. So the political element here has been flip-flopping the whole time. It's not been stable. And it almost seemed like an Orwellian test of your loyalties. How much are you willing to go along with the party line at the moment, even if it contradicts the party line from last week? What is your loyalties?
Well, you saw it even with the Sputnik vaccine, right? The Russian vaccine. They were talking about how they wouldn't even entertain it coming to the U.S. And I'm just like, wait, if it works and you guys are really concerned about saving lives and you think this vaccine could possibly help people, why would you already be dismissing it? And you saw it also with the patents. Bill Gates would go, I remember, I forget what show he was on where he did an interview and they were talking about getting the patents to the vaccine to these other smaller labs that could do it cheaper and just basically helping get the vaccine out to these poor countries and poor areas. And he wanted nothing to do with it. It's like, how much more evidence did you need that this wasn't about the stopping the spread of a virus? And it's just, for me, it was frustrating because it was so obvious. And not just that, it was frustrating because I felt like it was an issue that whatever ideology you had, you could find a reason to be for opening up the country and all those things. Because if you're on the left, if you're left leaning, you're very, I mean, those typically were the people that were very anti-corporation, right? Like, oh, corporations are evil, that all they care about is profit. It's like, oh, so this is this is easy for you to see what's going on. Like, you should be able to see easily that big pharma's trying to push a experimental vaccine onto the public, and it's about profit. It's not about saving people. And then if you're on the right, like, you should be concerned about the government overreach. So it's like, you figure this is the issue we could all come together and kind of fight against, and yet people on both sides got scared. And but I think that's the power of fear, and then also the power of censorship, right? Because you couldn't, I think there's a lot of people who, if given the information and if they were given the ability or the all the information so they could filter out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, they could probably see through it. But the majority of people were going through their everyday lives, doing their chores, going to work, taking care of their kids. They weren't paying attention to the history that you were paying attention to, or they were kind of like now attached to the TV, assuming that these people that we call experts are there to give them the correct information and to protect them. And there were people who were completely oblivious to corruption in the media, corruption in big pharma, corruption all over the place. That's why I think that pandemic documentary went viral. And I've had Mickey Willis on, and Dr. Judy Mikovits and Dr. David Martin. I think it went viral because a lot of people were home trying to make sense of all this, watch something that seemed to make much more sense than what the TV was telling them.
Yeah, for sure. And then, of course, it got demonized, right? The information control has just been astonishing and continues to this day. I mean, YouTube is absolutely brutal and it's arbitrary. I have, for some reason, never been blocked or stopped on Twitter. I don't understand that, because I've been tweeting about this for 2 years. Not even one time have I gotten anything. Oh, you're suspended for a day. Just like, I don't know. Whereas I have a ton of my friends who have just been thrown off, sometimes with warnings, sometimes without. But this is the nature of authoritarianism. You don't know what the real rules are. I mean, the terms and conditions are increasingly vague. Now they're just, terms or conditions are, we'll take you down if we don't like you. I mean, that's basically it. And so they're not really rules. So they're arbitrarily enforced, and you just never know. And what it does is it scares you into a weird compliance, but you're not sure what you're complying with. That's the thing. So you just become even more cautious than you should be, and it's sad. I mean, I've seen people try to handle this on Twitter. They'll get a warning, and then they'll tweet, I got a warning, but I'm not going to stop telling you the truth. I mean, this is how I'm going to handle this. Nobody's going to be able to muzzle me. Well, a week later, they're gone. Okay. So, they had 250,000 followers or whatever. Suddenly it's all gone. Now, this is like, I think it's a kind of an act of theft in some way. It's hard to argue, but I look at it this way. People get on these social media platforms for years. People developed fan followings and followers as a kind of, just like you with your podcast. I mean, you want people to like the podcast, put it on their podcast list and that sort of thing. And you think of it as an investment in your future. You have 50 followers and you have 500 followers and you have 5,000 followers, and you feel, well, I can turn this into something great. I can run ads, and you try to invest in your future, and you wake up one day and it's all taken away from you. I mean, YouTube accounts with millions of followers are suddenly just gone. It feels like theft, because you've spent years and countless hours and of intelligence and hard work developing a following, only to have it just taken away from you. That's an astonishing thing. And I'm pretty sure that people didn't, I think maybe 10 years ago, we knew that something like this could happen, but very few people believed it ever would, because we figured that places like YouTube and Twitter and LinkedIn and so on had every incentive to retain people, and we're providing their free content for their platforms. I mean, why would they kick us off? Why would they ban us? It doesn't make any sense. But at some level of compulsions from the top, and then also maybe profitability, they saw now no downside to it, and it's a shock, and it's massively changed our lives and our sense of the platforms and the sense of what we should be doing with our lives, how we should post. It's given a huge boost to blockchain technology because we're tired of the censorship. Everything is different now than it was 2 years ago. Everything, and it's going to get more different still.
Well, like you said, it's since the beginning of time, there's always been people who want to control other people. There's always been the elite who want to control others. And if you're the elite, if we know that they exist and they're out there, if it's Klaus Schwab, whoever it may be, then, the CIA, like if you're the elite and the power of Google and YouTube, same way that the CIA got involved with the media and newspapers with Operation Mockingbird, there would be a operation to get involved with YouTube and Google and Twitter and Facebook and all the big tech companies, because if it's about control, if it's about controlling the narrative, then why wouldn't you get involved with these huge tech companies that have incredible analytics, that understand people better than they understand themselves, understand how to manipulate people, how to change people's opinions, how to change people's perspectives. I mean, we're only as good as the information we have access to, and if somebody's controlling that information, then they're basically controlling us.
Yeah, it becomes extremely important for government, because there are restrictions on government on what it can and cannot do. There's courts and there's Bill of Rights, and we have traditions of restricting government. But if it's private, then you can do anything. Anybody can do anything to anybody. It's just justified on basis of private property rights. Private enterprise can censor. So government has very strong incentive to kind of outsource its tyrannical ambitions to large corporations. And large corporations have a very strong incentive to get along with the regulators and to be treated with kid gloves by the political elites. So they have every incentive to play along. So what happens is you develop over time this sort of symbiotic relationship between big government and big business, where they both feed each other, they both need each other, and they protect each other. Government protects the private enterprise. As long as private enterprise does the bidding of the government, private enterprise will pay the government and its employees, so long as there's when the moment comes, the government will use its regulatory powers to help that business. I mean, a classic example is the FDA and Big Pharma, right? I mean, so half of FDA's budget is funded by the pharmaceutical companies. For the EUA, for example, the emergency use authorization sent for the Pfizer included a check, wrote to the head of vaccine approvals for the FDA, who's since resigned, by the way, in protest, but wrote to her and said, here's our application, enclosed as a check for, God, how much is that check for? I'm just going to make up a number. It's $1.2 million, something like that. It was a filing fee. Well, a filing fee. I mean, a filing fee is $10. I mean, it's not millions of dollars. I mean, this is clearly a racket, And I looked at that document. I was like, why isn't there a national scandal about this? We have clearly the case, a highly regulated industry in private hands, paying a government agency directly millions of dollars to get its drug approved with emergency use authorization, not actually investigated very carefully, just approved based on emergency use. And they're getting millions of dollars in revenue and then they give it, and then they mandate it. I mean, you'd think that there would be, torches and pitchforks, and people rioting in the streets in the face of this kind of corruption. But I don't know if people understand it. It's almost like it's a taboo topic to not even talk about it.
Yeah, it was weird because I don't know anybody who was all out for the vaccine mandates. I know people who were like, "Yeah, I don't think it's the worst thing ever," and then I know people who were really radically upset. So I'm just like, the government's pushing something onto the public that we didn't ask for, and we didn't. The majority of us don't really want, and even the people who aren't against it, I wouldn't say we're passionately for it, and yet we were all just going along with it. And it's like they just kept going further and further and further from, and even like some of the things, like I would tell people, I'm like, listen, none of this makes sense. The fact that they're giving you every incentive possible to get vaccinated, like you don't have to wear a mask, even though the mask is supposed to stop you from spreading a virus that you have, supposedly, allegedly. But yet, if you get vaccinated, it doesn't stop you from getting it or spreading it. So why would you get the benefit of not having to wear a mask? It's all about incentives. It was like people, they really planted this seed in the people's minds that this trauma, like we're discussing, this trauma of having everything locked down, of being afraid, locked in your house, not being able to have the holidays with your loved ones, your kids not going to school, like all this trauma will go away if you guys just open up to this idea of getting this vaccine. By the way, it's emergency authorization. It's a technology that's never been used on the public before. And because it's emergency authorization, we can't advertise it. So we got to get everybody else to advertise it. So influencers, content creators, sports teams, everybody was advertising this vaccine, which was mind-boggling that you just had all this propaganda coming from all directions, while things like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, all this stuff got demonized, like we discussed before, for political reasons, only because Trump mentioned it. And so all of a sudden it's like, must be bad because Trump mentioned it. Do you see, like, the bigger picture, I guess, looking forward? Do you see people eventually getting in trouble for somebody being responsible for what everybody had to deal with in the last couple years? Or do you think the majority of people are going to get away with it and people are just going to move on to the next focus, which could be, geopolitical issues?
I think they'll get away with it, and what's going to happen is they'll retire and disappear, which is what we've seen this model. Donald J. McNeil stuck his neck out at New York Times and volunteered to be the one to panic the world, and then mysteriously, a year later, they discovered that he used a bad word 10 years ago on a trip to Colombia. On a student trip, he used a derogatory term for another race, and suddenly he was fired from his job. So now he's not a liability anymore. And then same thing happened with Andrew Cuomo, who's like the nation's lockdown governor, the great hero, Emmy Awards, a great man, lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Then he started saying, maybe we should open up New York. This is a problem. Next thing you know, well, it seems like a lot of people complaining about sexual harassment, my friend. We're going to have to drive you out of office. And then his brother at CNN, similar lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. Suddenly he's toast. So a lot of the lockdown, I think Walensky is next on the list, by the way. They're going to get gradually, people get fired, not for reasons of lockdown, but for some other manufactured excuse. So that way they go away. And there's lots of heads on platters, and then Fauci will eventually retire. And then by the time that the investigations take place this November, and we start getting real hearings about these things, most of the perpetrators will have vanished from memory. I mean, the FDA has already been purged. And yeah, I don't think there's going to be anybody left to blame. I think they're all going to have lost their jobs. And the way American culture works is we don't like to put people in jail. What we like to do is give them a good 48-hour humiliation. Everybody hating on them for 48 hours, and they lose their jobs, and then people forget about them. So I think that's what's going to happen, and it's really tragic. I do believe that the Republicans have, and I'm just presuming that they're going to sweep Senate and House come November. They'll have subpoena power at that point, so they'll bring a lot of people in, and get to the bottom of at least the lab leak, the gain of function, which I think a lot of this traces to that. Figure out what happened. It's a problem for the Republicans, though, because they cannot help but implicate Trump in this. I mean, Trump is the guy who pulled the trigger. He bears the primary responsibility for kicking off these for the lockdowns and for Operation Warp Speed. So it's going to be a problem for the Republicans. I think both parties have an incentive just to kind of forget about it, move on. But this is one of the reasons for Brownstone, right? I'm just not willing to let this go. I mean, to me, this is one of the great scandals in the history of the world. And I don't care if the whole world moves on from it. It's like, who cares? All the emergency powers are still there. Nobody's apologized. In fact, they swear they'll do it again. We have to make dramatic changes. And we have to get to the bottom of this. We can't let it go.
That's so important. And that's one of the reasons why I brought that up, because I think it would be much easier emotionally, psychologically, to just move on from it and be like, okay, it was something that happened. It sucked. There's a lot of bad people that were responsible for it, but I finally got my life back. Let's not ponder on it. Let's not relive it. I've gone back and watched documentaries like Planet Lockdown and I think The New Normal and Plandemic and all these documentaries that are coming out in the last couple of years, and to see the clips of the politicians talking about having to lock down the country, and then the clips of like the streets being dead with nobody driving or walking around, like it gives me anxiety just seeing it again. Like the imagery is just like, oh my god, that sucked so bad. I can't, like, it was still something so surreal to see all sports shut down, all the stores shut down, like, and it really was, even for somebody who like myself, who kind of was doing my best to figure out as quickly as possible what was going on. I still feel like there's some type of trauma, some type of negative effect psychologically left that I'm dealing with when I see those videos. So I could just imagine the people who fell for it or really were afraid, and then the poor kids, because one thing that I keep talking about, it's like these poor kids. I mean, you sense when your parents are stressed or fighting or whatever, and it's like these parents who were really afraid, who end up putting that stress and anxiety on their children. I mean, that's that's lifelong trauma that they're going to have to deal with, and maybe never really figure out how to fix it or how to resolve it or whatever. But I mean, this idea of being afraid to touch people and hug people, I mean, that's the most human aspect of us is culturally. I'm Portuguese, and my dad makes wine, he makes chorizo, he makes and it's like, you look at all these cultures, one thing they all have in common is community, right? We a lot of these traditions we continue doing over and over again because it's a excuse to drink and be around each other and hang out. And it's like, you took the most important thing of that helps us stay happy and sane, and that's being around others. You took that away from people, and and I think there's long lasting effects to that, and we can't let that go, and we have to do our best to try to make sure somebody's responsible for it, or if not, history will repeat again. So
yeah, it's a trauma for the children especially, and I don't know, we've already seen loss of 2 years of educational progress, and weird things happening with the people who are applying to colleges right now. If they come out of a public school, are behind 2 years, they know basically nothing, and so they can't get into universities. So the people who are getting into the universities and doing well on the exams and even the interviews are the people that were in private schools, because the private schools stayed open. So once again, it's just privilege, ruling class. It was a ruling class coup. It really was a coup against equality.
It was, and I think if there's any good that came out of it, it did expose some people. It did show that the scientific world's not as scientific as many people thought it was, and also showed some of the issues with schooling, right? Because you see the popularity of homeschooling, you see the parents being much more aware of what that schools were teaching their kids what to think and not how to think, and that continues. I think you're still seeing that trend of concerned parents getting involved in their schools and their locally a lot because of what happened in 2020, and people being, a lot of parents, like even like myself, like, wait, what are you teaching our kids? Like, what ideology are you pushing on?
It's shattered the public schools. I mean, it's an unbelievable situation where, public schools have been, the foundation of progressivism for 150 years, and somehow, the progressive lockdowners, didn't think this through, shut the schools. And then parents are suddenly all forced to homeschool. A practice that was previously under a cloud is now mandatory, and they got to see what their kids are being taught. So it's, they join the school. So it's led to a kind of a education revolution in this country. I just don't think the left had entirely thought through what they were doing. The implications of this, it's just unbelievable. Incredible.
You don't think it's a part of a bigger plan in regards to, like, you hear a lot of conversations about transhumanism, the metaverse, like,
Yeah.
do you think it could be baby steps in that direction? And
Yeah, I don't think so. Yes, I think there definitely are some really bad actors out there that want all sorts of terrible things. But how it is that all this happened, it's not because anybody had a plan and pulled the trigger. It was just many things came together. I don't think one single force runs the world. In this case, it was just a coming together of various forces. Good timing, the right pathogen, the right players, the right fears. I also think that a lot of people in our country and around the world were kind of looking for meaning in life, and they weren't getting it through through the normal experience of bourgeois life, and the lockdowns gave them some sort of mission. Fighting the pathogen was a way to step up and do something for others, stay home, stay safe, and all this kind of stuff. And so it became a religion in highly secular times. People are always looking for liturgies and rituals and religions and implausible things to believe. And somehow the coronavirus became exactly that. So there is that element, The best book on the subject I think everybody should read is by Paul Fridgers and Gigi Foster, and I published it at Brownstone. It's called The Great COVID Panic, and I think it's by far the best single book on the topic.
Awesome.
Yeah. So you should have your listeners. You can buy it. It's like $5 download on Kindle. It's a wonderful book.
Great. Yeah, definitely. And I'll also check it out and maybe even reach out to the authors. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on. I know you're a busy man and you have a lot to do, but can you let listeners know what platforms you're on and
Sure.
also what websites to check out if they want to keep up with your work? And
Yeah, I really, of course, I'm on Twitter, but I really like Getter. It's getting better all the time. It's called Getter, Gettr. It's really good. Parley, I'm on, and Gab, of course, and LinkedIn, but I assume I'm going to get kicked off at some point like that. And then Brownstone has a YouTube channel for now, but we also do Odyssey and Rumble, both of which are wonderful video platforms. Our main website is brownstone.org, and I encourage people to sign up for our email, because that's just, in the end, the most reliable way to communicate with people. So I always urge people to sign up for that and check out our content.
yeah, is there certain topics, just to let the listeners know, is there certain topics you guys focus on, certain things that you write about more than others? What can they expect from Brownstone?
Well, yeah, I'm dealing with, to continue the anti-lockdown stuff, the collateral damage from lockdowns, public health, vaccine mandates, and general theories of human liberty. Like, what kind of society do you want to live in? What is the relationship between the individual and the community and the state? What is the role of big tech and making the dreams of censorship come true for tyrants. I mean, these are the kinds of topics we really focus on. I'm very careful. Every article I publish, I believe, is extremely valuable. I don't run any garbage. So I think your listeners would really like it. Our traffic, our reads are in the tens of millions at this point.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think that, without a doubt, like websites like that and just resources like that are so important, because if God forbid something like 2020 ever happens again, we need websites that we can trust and people we can trust to help figure out what was going on.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think of it as a sanctuary. At least that's what I'm trying to build. I'm not just here for this year or next. I want to build a long-lasting institution to provide sanctuary for good ideas and good minds and good people to outlast the crisis and to always be in a position to rebuild. We need these in the Middle Ages. We needed them in the interwar period, and we need them now. And that's what Brownstone is.
Yeah, good ideas and a place where ideas can be challenged, because that's one of our biggest problems, is that people aren't willing to discuss their disagreements. I learn from people challenging my ideas and challenging my worldviews, because then I have to reconsider if I have it figured out or not, or maybe there's another perspective that I need to examine and explore. So I think the divide and conquer technique has worked all too well for too long, and people need to kind of open their minds and hearts to different perspectives and ideas and realize that we're all a part of the humanity and we're not the enemy. And somebody who disagrees with you, it shouldn't be somebody you dislike. It should be somebody you should try to build a bridge, not burn a bridge with. So it's, I think it's important. So I really appreciate all the work you're doing, Jeffrey. Hopefully we reconnect again sometime in the future, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you so much.